Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we're going to talk about leadership, which is very much the topic of this show. We have a wonderful guest here, Dr. Daphne Scott. She is the founder of DS Leadership Life, and she specializes in creating mindful leaders and mindful organizations through leadership coaching programs that focus on mindfulness, positivity, creativity, and fun. Fun is good. Daphne and I have been having a lot of fun already. And so I know we're going to have a great conversation here. She has developed her coaching programs throughout 2 decades of real-world coaching and corporate development experience. She draws on her unique background as in improv theater and physical therapy to bring engaging embodiment and team-building elements to her coaching and facilitation. Wow, that's a mouthful for me, I guess. But
yeah, really.
It's been a long day. She holds a master's degree in applied positive psychology and a doctorate of science in physical therapy. So she's going to bring that to us here. And we're going to have, as I said, a very interesting conversation about leadership and how to develop successful teams. I also want to do a shout out to Interview Valet. Tom Schwab and his team have sent me amazing guests, and Daphne is no different. And so I just really appreciate them and their support of this podcast and always sending us amazing people to interview. So thank you to them and welcome to Leaders of Transformation. Daphne, we're excited that you're here.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm really excited to be here, actually. I know we're going to have a great conversation and just excited to be with you. So thank you for having me on the show. Very appreciative.
My pleasure. So I also want to do a little shout out for a book that I was, this is what is this? They call it a selfless plug. I don't know. Yeah. But anyway, I actually wrote a chapter in this book. It's called Power Up Superwomen. And it's stories of encouragement and empowerment for women. And if you want to check out more about that book, you can go to leadersoftransformation.com/resources. And it is available there to order. And also one last thing is if you enjoy this episode, and I'm sure you will, because we're going to have some great time here, afterwards, go on iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Sometimes I forget to say that, but it really does make a great difference. I read all of those comments, and but it also makes a huge difference in terms of our reach, our ability to reach more people, more countries. And we have listeners in over 120 countries right now. We just want to continue to extend that out so we can inspire people to be the difference maker and the world changer that they're capable of being. And that's you that are listening or that you're watching. We do this show because we want to inspire you, we want to equip you and connect you to the leaders that, are people that are making a difference in the world. So with that, let's talk about leadership and transformation. So I know, Daphne, every leader wants to be successful and they want to have a successful team, but there's something missing. That's not actually happening in most cases. So why is that?
Yeah, well, Nicole, great question. I got my first leadership role like most leaders do, which is I was really good at the job I was hired to originally do, which at that time was as a physical therapist. So I was really good at that. And it was like someone watched me walk and they said, wow, she's amazing at walking. She walks so well. As a matter of fact, she walks so well, we're going to have her go ahead and drive a car.
Great analogy.
Yeah, thanks. And with it comes along a lot of bumps and bruises, right? A lot of like fender benders. And most leaders, that's what they're experiencing. It isn't that they don't want to do well. They literally are not equipped with the skills and the abilities that they need to lead a group of people well. We make this really weird jump in our mind that people should just magically be able to lead a group of people. And that is not the case. And I think some people come with some basic chops and some understanding and, can kind of navigate it pretty well. But when you start really giving people access to the skills that they need and the abilities that they need, it becomes a whole different conversation. So back to your comment, most leaders want to do well. In my experience, I work with leaders, day in and day out, and I've not yet, maybe there was one time, but I haven't yet met someone in the leadership role who's like, I really hope my team is a disaster. I really hope that my team, they're listening to shows like yours for one of two reasons. Either they have worked with a leader who's done really poorly and they don't want to be that person, or they're trying to prevent becoming that person, right? They want their team to do well. So that's really what I really like to point to, is that most leaders that I work with really, really want to do well, and they're just not equipped with the skills that they need to do so. They struggle.
Well, and you talk about skills, they don't get trained. I forget the statistic, something like they get, this short amount of time for every 6 months that they're a leader, they get this like short, somebody was equating to this minute amount of time that they get to actually equip them to do that. Middle managers, and they're kind of like thrown into the deep end, like you're talking about. It's like, here, drive the car. And they're like, what? And you're a person. Don't you know how to deal with these relationships? Don't you have relationships in other parts of your life? Yeah, but it's different. And if you try to operate in that way, which don't we see that a lot, right? People learn how to operate in one way and then try to do that at home. Doesn't work so well. I'm going to tell you what to do. Yeah, that's not a good strategy. But so they're not equipped. They want to do well, but they're not equipped. So there's this gap, and you help fill that gap. So we're going to talk about that. Now, one of the things that from your material, I know you talk about 5 relationships that a leader needs to have. Maybe just let's start there with what are those 5 relationships?
Yeah, so the 5 relationships that I landed on over time are our relationship to time, our relationship to money, our relationship to self. So how we relate to our, idea of an identity, if you will. Relationships to friendships. That's probably the more traditional one when people think of relationships. They when I say 5 relationships, they're like, you mean with my accountant? Not exactly, although that might be important. And then our relationship to the unknown.
Oh, yeah.
So the idea of the 5 relationships is really, really about how we are relating to these 5 things. And I put time and money first because all 5 of these, to one degree or the other, are the sort of the main things that I found myself coaching leaders on over and over and over again. They're sort of their big complaints, when it came to friendship, that idea of like, it's lonely at the top. And there's some real unfortunate shadowy truth in there. So I kind of landed on these over time. And what I sort of surmised was that if we can really look at how we relate to these things, these ideas, these constructs, and, where we relate from fear as one example, or relate from a place of trust as another option, can be really powerful. So that's sort of the general summary of the 5 relationships.
Got it. Now, you just mentioned about relating to fear or to trust. How does that, give us an example of how they would look?
Yeah. Oh, such a great question. So let's use time. I think that's probably one of the best ones. And I'm sure we're human. We've experienced this. It's not just reserved for leaders, obviously, but the number one, if you think about when people say, when they talk about time, what's the number one thing that their relationship is to time, that they don't have
enough time.
Right. Yeah. Everyone, I don't have enough time. And so what we start to see is that, time is just sort of, it's not like a finite thing. It's not like you and I are going to go into the storage room and we're going to stand there and we're like, oh my gosh, Nicole, there's only 1 box of time left. Like, what has just happened? Somebody didn't tell us, it's not in that regard. So, but yet we have this experience of feeling like we don't have enough. And so what happens is we start to operate from fear. Like fear we're not going to get everything done, fear that we're going to fail in some way, that we're not going to have the resources that we need as it relates to time. So our decisions now start to get a little squeezed. We start to feel a little squeezed. And so when we're operating from a place of fear, then we don't have access to our best decision making. To get real sciencey, the prefrontal cortex and our executive function of the brain, but what it's really pointing to is that we have just a very narrowed scope. We have a very narrowed view. And there's all types of research on this, especially even when it relates to time. We tunnel, we focus on just the one thing, which has its place, but when we're doing it from fear, we focus on the one thing, and so we can't see the broader picture, the bigger picture of what's going on. We end up, I kind of like to talk about, we end up borrowing time, which I think is kind of funny, but what really happens is that we might put off things that we could handle right now, And then we
Mm-hmm.
end up having to sort of theoretically borrow from the future. And so we just have this experience that isn't really contributing to our well-being very much. And where the time and the money start to all blend in together with each other is that when as leaders who have access to a certain level of decision rights, right? So if I'm in a leadership role, formal leadership role, I am making decisions that absolutely are grounded on how people on my team are going to use their time, their energy, and how the organization or my team are going to use money, our budget. And so when I'm not in my best space, when I can't see the full picture, when I'm operating more from a place of fear, then my decisions just aren't that wise, and leaders want to be able to make wise decisions, not necessarily right decisions, but wise decisions.
Yes.
Right. What people are really wanting to have access to. So when we can see first and take responsibility for our relationship, to see that it isn't time doing something to us, it isn't money doing something to us, it's actually first and foremost how we relate to that starts to change the game.
Well, it's a good point. What you talk
Yeah.
about relationships with that is as simple and as obvious as that sounds. How often do we operate from a life is doing it to me, time is doing it to me? It's almost like you resent it after a while. Resent finance. I mean, who doesn't resent the finance department in a company, right? Right? Budgets. Oh, yeah. What's my budget going to be this year? And
Right.
It's this negative, fear-based, scarcity-based attitude
Totally.
towards it. So yeah, you make a really great point. It's like, well, so if you're making decisions in that space, coming from a place of fear, and of course that's going to rub on all your people as well.
Yes, absolutely. And so if we keep going with that, and then I love, I work with mindset, mindfulness, meditation practices, the whole thing. And I love that. And think it's absolutely mandatory and necessary in these modern times, and that being said, there's also this transactional part of things too. Like it's still really helpful to know how to organize your calendar. It's still really helpful to, right? To have these skills.
Yeah, I'm very Zen. Okay. And I'm actually ignoring the fact that there's all this other stuff that didn't get done. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I still have a 1:00 meeting, so I have that pragmatic approach, part of me that's like, yes, I absolutely think that managing how we're seeing the world and our perspective and doing our inner work is absolutely mandatory to be effective in the world, as well as learning some really simple skills and incorporating those sort of transactional parts of things, just in terms of time, as an example, that are really important too. And how do I organize, what's my trusted system for capturing things, not leaving things in my head, getting things out where I can see them, and make sense of the world in that way is really helpful too. So I love to play and work in both worlds with leaders, because I think they need both. And when you read about them, you always see them, it's like the self-help mindfulness stuff is over here, and then the businessy stuff lives over here. Go into any bookstore and that's sort of set up, and I'm like, well, I think we probably should talk about both.
Yeah.
That's the yes and.
Yes. And I love that. Yeah. Yes. It's not the either or. Well, so now you also, this improv, this idea of fun and play. I'm so curious, how do you bring this in when you're talking about some of these serious topics?
Yeah, great question. Well, there definitely is I like to say sincere, there's definitely a part of sincerity, I work with people, quite a bit, leaders in their teams, where they're processing emotion, working with their feelings. Some of it is unhooking us from sort of the fear of that too. And so the number one way that I know to do that is through the experience of play, but not play in a sense that we ignore people's more tender experiences. When I talk to groups, one of the things I like to remind the leaders of is, and for themselves too, it's estimated that probably a good 80 to 85% of humans on the planet have experienced some form of trauma. And that really plays itself out.
I'm above average. No.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. It's like 99. And we really want to have some reverence for that in regards that, bringing improv, the idea of improv, and I'll talk about what I mean by that, into the business world is really valuable at the same time that we can have, be mindful that there are times when there are going to be tender experiences that come
Yeah.
up for people, or difficult, challenging experiences, right? That being said, when it comes to really learning and being effective, we know now more than ever through research that when people can play or have a sense or an experience of play, they learn much faster. I make that, this is really tongue in cheek, but I'm like, if you're laughing, you're learning, it's sort of the kind of thing, right? So we do better in that regard. We learn faster. So there's a time for that. What the improv world has really taught me is there's just some really important skills. Yes, and is one of them. And what yes, and, how that shows up in the business world is really building on each other's ideas. There's nothing more sort of a buzzkill than being in a brainstorming session and people are throwing out ideas and all you hear is, yeah, but that's not going to work because, you can't, in improv, we'll say you can't forward the scene then, it just kind of falls flat. So learning that skill can be really valuable. The other one that comes through in the improv training is listening.
Mm.
When you're on a stage and you have no script and there are a good handful of people wanting to be entertained and your scene partner steps out, you really want to listen to what's being said and what's happening in the collective, because you need to be able to give back to them. It isn't just about just taking, but you need to be able to take what's being said and then give it back to them in a way that it can be really useful, so the listening part of it is a big part. So all these things kind of live in the world of improvisational theater, and how they typically teach it is through games and play. And so I bring that into the improv or into the working world as well. There's all kinds of games that we can play that really teach that art of listening and paying attention in a particular way, and at the root being really present. And now we see this blend of improv and mindfulness and all these things that we've all been talking about in different avenues, right? Different venues all come together, which is kind of wild. Yeah.
Well, I can also imagine that you in creating that space for play and for fun, you can also talk about some very touchy subjects in a lighter way because people will laugh about it. It's kind of like when I've done
Absolutely.
workshops on personalities, and that can be a real source of frustration, one personality, the way they see things versus another. But when I do it in this certain way where we're laughing about it, it's like, oh my gosh, I do that. Yeah, you do that too, and we're back and forth, and we're, it makes it easier to kind of bridge the gap on some of these things, or broach a topic that is a little bit more touchy.
Totally. I mean, couldn't agree with that more. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
So what are some strategies, like in terms of, so if you want to be an effective leader, and we've talked about a few here just in weaving, and you're talking about improv, but some of the things are important if you want to learn the skills. Sure, you can schedule the skills-based training that is traditional.
Mm-hmm.
If there is training in place, it's very skills-based training. Right? But you go beyond that. So talk to us a little bit about some of the strategies that you employ. And even for our listeners who are saying, okay, I want to be that, I want to avoid being that type of leader that I've experienced. Or I want to be the best, possible leader I can be. How do I do it?
Yeah. Great question. So I want to talk about it from two different poles, if you will, I guess, for lack of a better description. So one very specific thing that's important, and we talked about this a little bit, is going from realization to application. There has to be the intentionality around whatever the thing is that you're trying to work on. So one of the easiest ways that I work with that with leaders is to really get them focused on what's a specific behavior. What's the thing that, for some people it might be like, I want to be able to have those difficult conversations, or I want to be able to feel more comfortable with giving direction, or delegation, is a big one for people. So leaders. So, it's like, okay, that's the thing that you're going to be working on. Now we have to really get an action plan in place. Like we really have to say literally, what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that I'm going to be doing over this next 30, 60, 90 days? And what happens is, it's sort of interesting because it blends in with the mindfulness idea, but what starts to happen is there's very specific actions that are being taken. leaders can give themselves credit then when they do them, and which is nice. So you get some traction right away, which is good. And you get to see like, oh, I can actually do this, which the number one thing I think that comes up in any type of change, the last sort of, I call it the last one, which meaning the last fear is doubt. So we doubt that we can change. We doubt that we can be different. We doubt that we can learn the new skill. You know, I usually know when I'm running into that with leaders because I start hearing things like, well, that's just the way I am. You know, that's just the way I am.
Yes.
And I'm like,
Love
right.
that
And
one.
so you're like, yeah, you know, you're ising yourself, right? So we're not that static. We have patterns, but we're not that static. We're not that fixed. And so, you know, but what I know is coming up at that point is a lot of doubt, and which is fear, you know, doubt that I can be different, doubt that I can do this. So when we can get to have very specific actions in place that are going to reinforce, for example, if that behavior is delegation, that can reinforce that, it really allows leaders to see that very quickly they can get some traction on it, they can do it, and they start working that. So there has to be some intentionality behind it to just think that it's magically going to happen, that you can get into the actualization or the application phase of it. It doesn't work very well. This is where, you know, I think listening to podcasts is very, very powerful as an action step. You know, it's like, I want to reinforce this behavior. When I was I was on a path of shedding a few extra pounds that I had put on, you know, I really immersed myself in environments where that was where I was going to be supported, and in communities and things, and then had the action steps around that, could measure that. So I think that's really important for leaders to understand. Those changes do not happen sort of in a vacuum or magically overnight. Interestingly enough, what also happens though is that, and this is where the sort of the mindfulness part fits into this, you're tuning the attention. You know, you're sort of inclining the mind in a certain direction. And so leaders start to just notice, they're like, oh yeah, I kind of just took the opportunity to delegate that. I wouldn't have thought of that 6 months ago. You know, I've been doing it that way forever. And so what they're doing is inclining the mind that way at the same time, which is really powerful for them to see. So that's one pole. The other pole that's really important that gets probably skipped over the most is really the process of getting feedback from people who they work with that are important to them, from their direct reports, for example, 1 or 2 people, not 10 or 15 if they have that many direct reports, but, you know, around this is the thing that I'm really working on, and how's it showing up? You know, how am I doing? Getting some feedback. And that also starts to give more traction to the process over time. So I really like to, you know, that's sort of like really in the weeds of supporting leaders to make some of these changes so that they can really get into the actualized, instead of just realizing. Most leaders that I work with are relatively aware. You know, they have enough data about themselves to go like, I know I'm not doing this and it's really creating an issue for me. What they need though is more of the support and more of the structure around really being able to make those changes, and then getting the feedback from the people that they work with. You know, here's what I'm working on. How's it been showing up? How am I showing up to you? You know, what else can I do? And those are always vulnerable conversations on both fronts.
Yes.
For the leader, right?
It's like, am I actually going to tell you what needs to be said?
Yeah.
Last time I did that didn't go so well, or what?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's why I emphasize with, you know, leaders in particular, the sincerity, you know, not so much the seriousness of it. You know, we don't have to make it serious, but we do want to have some sincerity behind it, which I think is really important. And again, I think when I have leaders really tap into this, you know, the reality that they want to be successful, it starts to really, because this isn't the other path of being successful, you know, working with people. So it helps them quite a bit. So that was really in the weeds, but just to give people some really applied sort of things that they can, how they can go about doing that. Yeah. Really, and focus on one thing at a time is helpful.
Yes. Well, yeah. And if they have too many things, they almost feel it can feel very overwhelming. You know, and then you feel very wrong about it. There's most people have this right-wrong conversation going on. One of my mentors, he said, you know, it's not about right or wrong. It's either it worked or it didn't work to get the result you're looking for. And so it takes it out of personal. It's like, that didn't work. That behavior, it's not you're wrong, but that behavior doesn't work. If the outcome is we're looking to go here, well, you know, what are the other ways that we can, you know, what other ways could you approach it that would be more effective? But that being said, most people, that's not how they think. They think right, wrong. No. So if they've got all these things to work on, then they're feeling even more wrong and then more defensive. And you talk about fear and all of that. Like there's a safe, you got to create a safe place. Obviously you do that with your clients, create a safe place and a certain measure of confidence and security in themselves.
Yes.
This gentleman once, I remember him, he said, I'm going to give credit. It was Jim Harris. And he said, there are no secure jobs, only secure people. And I think that's true. It's like, if you can be secure in yourself, then you can ask for feedback and listen when you get that feedback. And this has been hard for me, and I've noticed myself being like, I don't like feedback because I've gotten feedback that wasn't really given to me. It was given to me perhaps sincerely, but not empathetically,
Yes.
like it's, and there was some projection going on in there too. Right. So I was kind of feeling that, is this about me or is this about you? And so you gotta, there's all of this going on. And so then they don't take, then there's not a safe place to take that feedback. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I never recommend the leaders that they go to their most challenging person. Don't start there if you're not used to doing that. And, it's a real culture shift, when leaders start to get on that edge of going to people. I mean, it is a real culture shift to suddenly now we're opening a door of, we're opening the door of giving each other input on what's happening, and most of us as humans shy away from that pretty reliably.
Yeah.
So it's normal. Yeah, it's normal.
Yeah.
So you start with people that, you have a good rapport with, and where there is that psychological safety. And I want to go back to what you said about right and wrong. I think that's so valuable because that really fits into this idea of perfection. And I think leaders really fall into that as well, that they have to have all the answers, that they know all the answers. Even when they're pretending like they don't know the answers, they still think that they should. And so I really love, Carolyn Dweck is a woman who I really love her work on this. And she did it primarily with school children. And her last name is Dweck, but she really looked at, the learning, really how we're just really always a process of learning. And her phrase is like, you didn't do it or you didn't get it yet. Not yet. Nice. And I just love that. Yeah, I really love it. I think it's a very compassionate way to come to ourselves and to our teams and to the things that we do want to accomplish. And the learning that, we don't control all the outcomes. We just don't. And even though we try, we just don't control all the things that make achieving a goal possible.
Yes. My little box.
Yeah, exactly. We think we control it. Yeah. But I really like her work as it comes to that. And so she's, people can look that up, but I really like her approach to what it is to really be in a learning phase of our life, which is always the case. So,
the curiosity. And it's interesting. I was just talking to somebody about the wonder of a child, having that curiosity. Children learn fast. Okay. So there's a correlation going on here.
Absolutely.
The reason why they learn faster. Now, when we had our pre-chat, we were talking about employee engagement polls. So I know how much you love them. So let's talk about what's wrong with those. Speaking of not talking about what's right or wrong, but let's talk about what's not working about those polls.
Yeah, first of all, just to really give, which you've done so well already in your show here, is to really give credit to the idea of what's being pointed to there. When we talk about engagement, what we want is we want a thriving workforce. We want people who, have access to well-being and they're enjoying what they're doing. We know that if that's happening, we're just naturally, I don't even know that it's a matter of being more productive that we need to talk about necessarily. And I know we have something on that we can talk about too. My experience, it's not that leaders need to be more productive. Usually the people that I'm working with are already highly productive. They wouldn't have gotten in their roles if they weren't. But what happens is they really want to have that level of productivity with less stress, right? Yes. So there's that. And I think that's what engagement's trying to really point to. It's like, how are people relating to their work? And, are they being supported to get their work done well? Do they have the resources they need to get their work done well? So I think there's some real value and asking some of those questions. As a construct, though, engagement really isn't defined very well. So we don't really know what we're measuring, which is an issue. This is my sciencey person coming out all of a sudden. But we really don't know clearly what we're measuring. And one of the big parts that I don't appreciate about this, the way that it's framed, is that when we talk about engagement, and this is the same as when we talk about culture, what starts to happen is it starts to get pinned on the leadership.
Yes.
And Right. Absolutely true that leaders in an organization, because of the seat that they're in, meaning they have access to certain decision rights, they get to have decisions about the budget. They get to have decisions about hiring and firing, typically who gets on the bus, who gets off. They they have access to how people are using their energy, how the organization's using the time. So their influence in an organization, incalculable. That I don't disagree with.
Yeah.
But when we start talking about how engagement happens, everyone has 100% responsibility for that. When it gets pinned on just the leadership, it sets up this dynamic. And I've watched this happen in cultures over and over again where they have done this. They get the results of a survey. We're going to work with the leadership team. I don't doubt that the leaders have challenges, because most leaders are in their role for like a decade before they get exposed to any sort of leadership, as we talked about, leadership training of any sort anyhow. So that doesn't surprise me. But how it's talked about is, we have an engagement problem and it's the leaders that are the cause. And what happens is we've just disempowered 80% of the organization.
Yeah, great point.
Now we've set up this blame dynamic that the reason I'm not engaged is because of my boss. The reason I'm not engaged with my work is because of, and it really sets up a pretty less than savory dynamic in teams and in organizations the majority of the time. Versus, yes, our leaders absolutely have some things and some skills that they can develop that could support this. And our teams, our culture does too. How do we really talk about everyone taking responsibility for the level of engagement that we want in the organization, that everyone is 100% responsible for the culture that's happening here? And the example I like to use for that is, the moment that anyone on a team, leadership or not, makes the decision to not gossip about one of their other employees or one of their other colleagues, they're making an incredibly powerful choice about the culture that they want to have.
Yes.
And I don't know most people, right? I don't know most people that wake up on Monday morning, they're like, you know what? I can't wait to get to work and just have the worst, crappiest time with my colleagues. No one's saying that typically. They want to go to
they're
work.
They're expecting it maybe, but they're not actually planning.
Yeah.
Not
really, not in my experience. They want to go to work and do well. They want to get their job done, at least get their job done and go home and know they've been effective and competent, to some degree. They want to have some autonomy. And at most, they want to be able to feel like they belong to something. So my issue with engagement and the way that it's talked about typically is that I feel like it really disempowers a majority, by the way. So a majority of an organization isn't made up of leadership. The leadership makes up actually a minority in an organization. Now, high levels of influence, of course, as we discussed. Nevertheless, if each person can take responsibility for their level of engagement, I think that's really where we start to change the game. So that's some of my soapbox about the idea of engagement, but I think we can shift the dynamic just a little bit. Might be more helpful.
Yes. And I love that. I know people actually, even in my family, who have worked in environments that were less than healthy. Let's just put it in terms of the culture. And there's always that choice, right? You can be in a highly dysfunctional organization and still, choose to be the best you. Yeah, you're going to be dealing with all these dynamics, but you can still be the best you and put your, and look at what you can do. And if everybody were to look at it like that, and what can I do and how can I contribute and eliminate gossip? Oh my gosh, that's a whole podcast in itself.
Yeah, we can have a whole conversation on that. Yeah.
My goodness, right? The reason why you don't want to have that gossip and so forth. But yeah, like to eliminate some of these things, and then it just makes it, it's hard. For leaders, yes, there's a huge amount of responsibility from the top, and they're not on the front lines, and there's maybe thousands of employees, and how do you know what's going on? And there's ways to do that. I know that you can, to check in on that and to have, obviously that's why you have middle managers, but yeah, I love that. It's about the owning it, the taking ownership, taking responsibility for it is really, really important. Now, you alluded to the whole idea of productivity and, why you don't need to get more done. I know we wanted to talk about that. So tell us a little bit about why we don't need to, do more.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I love to say this to leaders. I love to say, you actually need to get less done with less stress. And they just look at me like, what? It's so antithetical.
You don't understand.
Yeah. You don't understand. Like, seriously. And, there's, again, this is where the skills, I think, the how we relate to our role, leaders oftentimes get promoted because they have a high level of conscientiousness. They can get a lot done. They're very aware of what needs to get done.
Yeah.
And they have some chops and some skills in their role, as we talked about. So there's that part of it. But then there's this sort of dynamic where they just take on too much. They're not, from a very specific skill set, idea of delegation, not understanding how to do that well, not being taught how to do that well, and understanding why they want to learn how to do that well. It isn't just about releasing themselves from having too much on their plate. It has a lot to do with how successful the team can be and the organization can be. And, if you want your organization to grow, you have to develop other people. You have to, it's just part of the thing, You're not
going to be able to do it yourself. Yeah.
No. And this is sort of the reframe that I love to help, leaders start to recognize is like, if you have a team more than 5 people, you have a business and has more, you actually have already been delegating. I used to point this out in healthcare a lot because I'm like, the entire organization has delegated patient care to like hundreds of thousands of people that work here. The delegation's already been happening. And when leaders sort of have this moment of like, oh, you're right. I'm like, you're not the only person running this huge, in this huge company doing this thing. So that sort of helps them. And then there's just the skills of learning how to do that well. And so what really starts to happen is that as leaders can engage in that process a little bit more, they're developing the people around them. And then they get to be more specific. And now I'm going to twist this just a minute, because now we're going to go right back to time. You're going to see how this actually fits in. So they get more specific about what they are doing. One of the reasons that leaders feel like they don't have enough time, and I love to say this phrase to them, is that they will never have enough time to do the things they don't want to do.
That's true. Very true.
Right?
Yeah.
Like how many times have you and I have things on our list, and I know we have it on our list, and I'm like, oh, and
I love that when people say, I didn't get a chance to do that. No, you just didn't want to do it. Just say it.
Exactly. Just say it like, no, I have this thing on this list, and it's like the last thing I want to do.
Yeah.
So when leaders start to understand, and I think this is what some of the like being able to use our strengths is trying to point to as well. That when we can start to harness the strengths of other people and understand more about our teams and individuals on our team and what they can do well, and we can get ourselves comfortable with delegating. I think the rule, and I think this comes from John Maxwell, I think, but if somebody can do it, it's 80% as good as you can, let them have it. Right.
Yeah.
So, and now we start developing other people. Now what happens is the things that I'm really responsible for, that I'm kind of the only person that can do that sits in my wheelhouse, that's in my strength. Now I'm spending more time doing that. Yes. I do feel better. So when I make that phrase, you need to get less done with less stress, it's that whole dynamic that I'm pointing to that's kind of all congealed together that starts to make sense to leaders. Once they understand there's a path to doing that, Yeah. So they're plenty productive. They never have to worry about being more productive. They need to get more specific with their productivity. Yeah.
I love that. Get more specific with their productivity. Yeah. Because leaders, they're about getting things done, making things happen. It's just, what are you making happen? I guess.
More stress and chaos.
Yeah. More stress and chaos. Oh, congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah, we all have and can, I mean, again, this isn't a sort of start here, get there, and you're done. You're constantly looking at these things. I like to use the metaphor of a, plane flying from here to Los Angeles. You're always course correcting. I mean, it never flies in a straight line, right? So there's always those points to it. Yeah. But that's what I like to talk to leaders about, that a lot, having them kind of open up a little bit. It's like, oh, okay, this is how this matters. So, yeah.
Well, I hear freedom. I hear much more fun. I hear delegate, learn to delegate, develop the skills that you need. But more than that, this mindfulness that you incorporate of just being aware and actualizing what you're aware of, and actually making that, part of your, take one thing, work on that, develop it, and then work on the next thing. And so it's this process. And there's it's so funny. I've had leaders that tell me, well, I'm supposed to know this. And I'm like, really? why do you feel you need to know this? Like, you need to know everything. Like, who told you that? And I think there's some conditioning from school, where we're not taught to collaborate in teams, and maybe that's changing, but I remember when I was in school, unless they specifically said you're going to work on a project together, and
Yeah.
usually we weren't really taught how to work well on a project together. I don't know about you.
Which is why we always hated group projects, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there was a couple of people that did it all, and the rest just, we had to drag them along. But yeah, and that's, because we were, if it is to be, it's up to me, started very early on, and then it's just playing out. So this is really, really good. Daphne, I just, I love your lightheartedness about it too. You realize that this stuff, like, you don't get too serious about this. Yeah. These are, the implications of this can be serious and devastating to companies and to individuals. But the reality is, if we just look at it, not through intention and, but not serious as in being heavy about it, then we're much more open to and receptive to learn from it. So thank you so much. And any, final thoughts before we wrap up here today?
I think we hit a lot of the pieces, Nicole, that will really hopefully be helpful to your listeners and to the people who are looking to you for, support. So I think we hit a lot of it, and I think just coming back again and again to, what are we aware of now? What do we know now? Which I think is really powerful for people. Like, just starting at that root can be really, really helpful. So that's all I would add at this point.
Awesome. Well, Daphne, thank you so much. It's been so much fun.
Thank you. And people can find out, you are too. Thank you. And I did want to point out that people can find out more too. I created a special thing for your folks and your
here.
So, they can find me at daphne-scott.com/LOT. So for Leaders of Transformation, LOT, and there's a free giveaway there for them on feedback, as a matter of fact, that they can access if they feel so inclined, and find out more about me there too. So I just really want to appreciate you. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And I find you just incredibly easy to talk to. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And likewise. Yes. Well, and our listeners, I'm a big believer in taking action. Daphne already said it's about, taking action. And so I would encourage you, go to that link. We'll make sure it's in the show notes so that you can connect with Daphne. You can get that download. We'd love to hear your feedback. No.
Yes.
Maybe I do. No, yes, I do. Seriously, we want to hear your feedback on this show, and what you enjoyed, how it impacted you, and also what you want to hear more of. That's also helpful too, is to hear like if there's topics that we haven't covered, that, give us some ideas on what you would like to hear. We'd love to hear from you. You can go to leadersoftransformation.com and send us a message there. You can find us on social media. We have a great page on Facebook for those of you that are Facebookers, and Leaders of Transformation. And we actually share stories that, not just the people that are on the show, certainly those stories as well, but also other stories that we hear about of people that are making an impact in the world, or companies that are doing really cool things. And so if you go to that page, follow it, you'll see those stories come up, and they're inspired. To me, I find them very inspiring and encouraging.
They're very inspiring.
Because, yeah, thank you. Because, we hear all this negative news about all the bad things that are happening, and the planet's, not going to survive the next, 50 years and all this kind of stuff. And it's all very enlightening and, and encouraging. But no, in reality, I know some of these things are really happening. And there's a lot of things that are going on. There's a lot of companies that are doing amazing things and new discoveries and new innovations. And so we share those on that page whenever I hear of it. And you've got something that you want to share, please do. We'd love to hear from you as well. So I encourage you that. I look forward to hearing your feedback, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.